In the sprawling, restless city of Boston lived a young woman named Mia Winters. To the wealthy patrons she served at the 24-hour Riverside Diner and the hurried crowd she navigated on 3 buses to reach her children's school, she was nearly invisible. Just another tired face in orthopedic shoes. Another set of hands refilling coffee at 3 in the morning. The checkered diner floor stretched beneath her feet, black and white squares blurring together after the dinner shift ended at 2:14 a.m. November rain hammered against the steamed windows. The neon sign outside cast a sickly glow across the empty booths, and Mia sat alone at a corner table, her apron still bearing the coffee stains of the night, counting bills with trembling fingers. $78. That was everything. The worn bills lay in a small pile on the Formica table, and she stared at them like they were made of gold. $78 to last until the next paycheck. $78 to feed 2 children. $78 to survive. 3 weeks earlier, a fire had taken her apartment. The flames came in the middle of the night, fast and hungry, and by the time Mia woke screaming, half of everything she owned was already burning. Her daughter Ava's winter clothes were gone. Her son Marcus's textbooks were ash. The photographs, the irreplaceable ones of her mother, of better days, of Ava as a newborn with skin like silk, all of it turned to smoke. The fire department said it was faulty wiring. The landlord said it was not his fault. The insurance company said the policy had lapsed. And Mia, standing on the street in her nightgown while strangers sprayed water on the skeleton of her home, understood something fundamental: she was on her own, and the world was not gentle to women who were alone. A crumpled foreclosure notice sat in her purse. She did not need to pull it out to know the numbers. She had memorized them. The property she had never owned, a fabricated document that had arrived 3 days ago, was supposedly in her name, and someone named Douglas Hale claimed she owed $65,000. $65,000. The number was so absurd that at first she had laughed. Then she had cried. Then she had done what she always did: she had put on her waitress uniform and gone to work. The diner was empty except for one old man nursing black coffee in the corner booth, and the hum of the kitchen where Miguel, the night cook, was wiping down the flat top. Mia stood, pocketed the $78, and tied her apron strings tighter. It was time to take out the trash before heading home to her children. The back door of the diner opened onto a narrow alley where 3 industrial dumpsters stood like sleeping giants. Rain fell in sheets now, soaking through her thin jacket. The wind cut like a blade wrapped in ice, and Mia pushed her hair from her face as she dragged the garbage bags across the wet pavement. That was when she heard the sound. Not the rain. Not the wind. Something else. An engine, powerful and close, moving too fast. Then the screech of tires. Then the violent crunch of metal hitting metal as a black sedan careened into the dumpster enclosure, its front fender crumpling like paper. The driver's door swung open. A man stumbled out, and Mia's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, 6'2" at least, with dark hair and a white dress shirt that was now soaked in blood. His left shoulder bloomed crimson, a spreading stain that grew darker with each passing second. He collapsed against the dumpster, his knees buckling, and Mia dropped the garbage bag she was holding. She ran to him without thinking. "I can help you," she said, her voice barely steady. "I can help." What happened? The man's eyes opened. They were dark, almost black, burning with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step back. His hand reached out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Matteo," he rasped, the word barely a whisper. "My son. Find Matteo." The intersection near the school. The car hit him. A blue sedan. "Find him." Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp, his head tilting to one side. Mia did not hesitate. She pressed her apron against the wound in his shoulder, her small hand shaking as she applied pressure. The blood was warm and copper-smelling, mixing with the rain that fell harder now, and she screamed toward the diner. "Miguel! Call 911. Someone call an ambulance." She knelt in the puddle, her knees cold and wet on the pavement, keeping pressure on the wound even as her hands shook. The rain hammered down on them both, and she whispered words she did not remember learning. "Stay with me. Please stay with me. You are going to be okay. The ambulance is coming." Then she heard the sound of footsteps. Fast. Coordinated. Multiple people moving at once. 2 men in black suits appeared from nowhere, stepping out of the darkness like they had been waiting in the rain all along. Both were enormous, broad-shouldered, with cold eyes and visible guns tucked into shoulder holsters. The first one reached down and grabbed her wrist, his fingers crushing hard enough to hurt. "Step away from him," he said. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. "He is dying," Mia said, her voice shaking but firm. Her apron was soaked with blood. "I called an ambulance. Let me help him." "Step away," the man repeated. "No." The word came out louder than she expected. "He is dying. I will not step away." The second man spoke into a radio that she had not noticed before. "Boss is down. Dumpster enclosure, Riverside Diner, back alley. Gunshot wound to the left shoulder. Civilian present. Non-threatening. Appears to have called the ambulance." There was a pause. Then a voice crackled back through the radio, speaking in rapid Italian that Mia did not understand. The first man looked at her differently then. Not with anger, but with something more like calculation. He nodded slowly, and his grip on her wrist loosened, though he did not let go. "Keep the pressure on," he said. "The ambulance is 4 minutes away." So Mia knelt there in the November rain, her hands pressed against the shoulder of a stranger who had whispered about his son, and she prayed to a God she had stopped believing in years ago. The man in the wet white shirt did not open his eyes again, but she felt him breathing, shallow and rapid, and she whispered to him, "You are going to be okay. Your son is going to be okay. I am here with you. You are not alone." The rain fell, and the sirens wailed through the darkness, and a young woman who had $78 to her name held a dying man in her arms and refused to let him disappear into the night. But what she did not know, what she could not have known, was that she had just stepped into the life of Luca Castellano, a man whose name made police commissioner sweat and federal agents build entire task forces. She did not know that every second she spent holding pressure on his wound, defying his men, speaking to him like he was human and not a god, was being etched into his memory in a way that would change everything. She did not know that her small act of courage would collide with forces she could never imagine, and that before the winter ended, the powerful men of Boston would learn to fear a young woman in orthopedic shoes. But that story had not yet begun. First, we must go back. Back to where it started. Back to the morning when Mia woke up and the world was still ordinary, and she did not yet know that her invisible life was about to become extraordinary. 3 nights before the rain-soaked parking lot, before the black sedan and the bleeding man, Mia Winters stood in the middle of Harbor Street and watched a child collapse into the darkness. The boy was 12, maybe 13, with dark curly hair and a school uniform still tucked in at the waist. He had stepped off the curb without looking. The car that hit him did not stop. Its taillights disappeared around the corner like a prayer that went unanswered, and the boy lay motionless on the cold asphalt while the November wind scattered his backpack across 3 lanes. Mia was walking home from her shift. Her feet ached in the orthopedic shoes she had bought 3 years ago at a liquidation sale, and she was counting the steps to the bus stop, 64 steps, then she would sit for 4 minutes, then walk the remaining 8 blocks to the apartment. She had done this calculation so many times it had become automatic, like breathing. 64 steps. For minutes. 8 blocks. But when the boy's eyes were open but unfocused, the way eyes look when they are seeing something very far away. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the concrete like spilled wine. Mia had no training. She had never taken a first aid class. But she had 3 children at home, and mothers know how to stop bleeding the way they know how to breathe. It is something that happens without permission from the brain. She pressed her hand against the wound. Hard. Steady. The boy gasped. "I know it hurts," she said, and her voice was different from her diner voice, different from the voice she used when customers snapped their fingers and she came running. This voice was gentle. This voice belonged to someone who had held her own children through fevers and stomach sickness and the kind of nightmares that come at 3 in the morning. I know it hurts, but I need you to stay still. Help is coming. Can you tell me your name? Matteo, the boy whispered. His hand found hers, and he held it like it was the only solid thing in a world that had become liquid and dangerous. My shoulder. It hurts. I know, sweetheart. I know. She kept the pressure on. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. Her hand was growing cold. The November wind cut through her uniform. She was still in her diner shoes, still wearing her apron with the coffee stains from the breakfast rush, still thinking about the 64 steps home and whether she had enough to buy milk for the morning. But she did not let go. A woman walking past slowed, then stopped. She pulled out her phone. Other people emerged from storefronts and parked cars. Nobody knew what to do. They stood in a half-circle, watching a young woman in an apron kneel beside a bleeding child, and they did what Americans do when they encounter crisis. They filmed, they called, they waited for someone official to arrive and make sense of the chaos. Mia ignored all of them. She spoke only to Matteo. What grade are you in? She asked him. 7th, he said. His voice was smaller now, the voice of a much younger child. 7th grade. That is wonderful. Do you have a favorite subject? Science, Matteo said. Biology. Biology is beautiful, Mia said. And she meant it, though she had never taken a biology class, had dropped out of high school when she was 16, pregnant with Ava and terrified and in love with a man who would later become Douglas Hale. Tell me about biology. Tell me about something you learned this week. The sirens were 4 minutes away, and while they approached through the November darkness, Mia Winters held a stranger's child in her arms and listened to him talk about mitochondria and cells, about the way living things are built from smaller living things, about how complexity comes from simplicity if you understand the pattern. An ambulance pulled up. Paramedics moved her aside with professional efficiency. She stood, and her legs almost did not hold her. Her uniform was stained with Matteo's blood. Her hand shook as she wiped it on her pants. The paramedics asked her questions. What happened? Did you see the vehicle? What is the child's name? And she answered in a voice that sounded like it came from very far away. By the time the ambulance left, taking Matteo to St. Mary's Hospital 3 blocks south, Mia had already missed the bus. She walked the 8 blocks home in the dark, and she never learned the boy's last name. She never knew that the paramedics would call his father, Luca Castelliano, a name that made Boston police commissioners sweat through their shirts at 3 in the morning. She just walked home to her children. The apartment was dark when she arrived. All 3 of them were asleep, Ava on the mattress she shared with Mia, the twins on a futon in the corner that had cost $15 at a thrift store 2 years ago. Mia stood in the doorway and did not turn on the light. She could see them by the glow from the streetlight outside, their small shapes under blankets that were not quite warm enough, their breathing synchronized in the way of children who have learned to sleep close together for warmth. She had $78 in her pocket. Not $78,000. $78, in worn bills and loose change from the tip jar, counted carefully that morning and placed in a zippered compartment in her purse. $47 of that was spoken for the electric bill that was 3 days late. The rest needed to stretch for more days until the next paycheck, and then that paycheck would have to cover rent, which was $340 a month for this 2-room apartment with the water-stained ceiling and the radiator that clanked at odd hours like it was trying to communicate a message in a language nobody spoke. The fire had taken everything else. 3 weeks ago, on an October night when Mia was working a double shift, the building had caught fire on the 3rd floor. An electrical fault, the fire department said. A landlord who had not maintained the wiring. A tragedy. A word that meant nobody's fault and everybody's problem except the person who should be held accountable. Mia had stood in the parking lot at 4 in the morning, still in her diner uniform, watching flames consume everything she owned, the children's winter clothes, the photo albums, the quilt her grandmother had made before she died, the small collection of books she had read over and over until the pages curled. The fireman who handed her the photo album, the only thing the firefighters had salvaged, said nothing. What could he say? She had a daughter and 2 sons standing in Red Cross blankets, shivering. She had a job that paid $7.25 per hour. She had no insurance that would cover the loss. She had nothing. The Red Cross had given her vouchers for temporary housing while she found the apartment on the 3rd floor of a building on the edge of downtown, the kind of neighborhood where people do not ask too many questions about credit ratings or eviction histories. The landlord had taken the vouchers and asked no further questions. She had rebuilt her life from rubble with the only currency she possessed, her body, her time, her willingness to work until her feet ached in orthopedic shoes and her hands smelled permanently of other people's food. Now she stood in the darkness and listened to her children breathe. She did not turn on the light. Electricity cost money. She had 3 days of work scheduled this week, Monday through Wednesday, shifts from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, back to back to back, and then she had asked if Tony, the diner manager, had any evening shifts available. He had given her Thursday and Friday nights. For days of work. For days to turn $78 into what she needed to survive the following week. It was the mathematics she lived inside. Addition and subtraction with no hope of multiplication. She changed out of the bloody uniform and washed her hands in the sink, watching the water run pink. She did not think about Matteo. She could not afford to think about Matteo. Thinking about other people's children, other people's pain, was a luxury reserved for people who had already secured their own survival. She lay down beside Ava, who was 7 years old and still small enough to fit in the space between Mia and the wall, and she stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. At 5:30 in the morning, her alarm went off. She moved carefully so she would not wake the children. She showered in the dark, the water heater was on a timer, and she dressed in her other uniform, the duplicate she had bought 5 years ago and hand-washed every night since. She braided her hair while looking in the mirror her neighbor had given her, a cloudy mirror that made her face look like someone underwater, which felt accurate because Mia often felt like she was drowning in slow motion. Her reflection showed a woman who was 28 years old but who looked 45. Her eyes had the specific exhaustion of someone who has given everything and found it was not enough. Her hands were raw from washing dishes in water that was always too hot. Her hair, which had been blonde when she was younger, had faded to a dull grey blonde, as if the color had been bleached out of her by time and hardship and the specific desperation of a single mother with no safety net. She left $2 on the counter for the babysitter, Mrs. Chen from downstairs, who watched Ava and the twins for less money than daycare would cost, who pretended the $2 were a real wage instead of what they actually were, which was an acknowledgement that Mia understood the value of her time. The Saturday shift at the diner was 14 hours long, from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. By hour 9, Mia's feet had begun to argue with her in a language that existed below thought, a constant complaint transmitted directly from her soles to her brain, reminding her that the human body was not designed to stand on its feet for 9 consecutive hours while smiling at people. The diner was called the Sunrise, though nobody at the Sunrise had seen a sunrise in a very long time. It had a checkered floor, black and white, that Mia mopped every evening after the last customer left. The booths were red vinyl, split in several places and repaired with duct tape. The coffee machine hissed constantly, a sound that had become the soundtrack to Mia's daily existence. Around 2 in the afternoon, during the lunch rush, a man entered through the front door and took a seat in booth 7. He was expensive, from his polished shoes to the gold watch that caught the light when he lifted his hand to wave Mia over. His suit probably cost more than everything Mia owned, including the apartment. She approached his table with her pad and her professional smile, the one that made her face into a mask that bore no resemblance to her actual interior state. "Welcome to the Sunrise," she said. "What can I get for you?" He did not look at her. Not at her face. His eyes moved past her like she was a part of the building, like she was the wall or the window or the checkered floor beneath her feet. He ordered a turkey club sandwich and a side of fries and a coffee with room for cream. She wrote it down and brought it to him 15 minutes later. He had not moved from his seat. His phone was in his hand, and he was speaking to someone on the other end of the line about a vacation home in Cabo, a property that had cost him the kind of money that made Mia's mind go blank trying to conceptualize it. "The water is perfect this time of year," he said into the phone. "I am thinking of renting it out when we are not there. It could generate a six-figure income annually." Mia set the sandwich and fries in front of him. He did not pause his conversation. He did not nod or thank her. He simply continued talking about his vacation home and the possibility of generating six figures while she stood there, still in her orthopedic shoes, thinking about whether she could afford to buy Ava's school supplies for the upcoming month. The school had sent home a list: 1 box of colored pencils, 1 package of ruled paper, 1 box of tissues for the classroom, 1 jar of hand sanitizer. The list came to $47. Mia had $31 remaining after the electric bill. The man finished his conversation and ate his sandwich without looking up from his phone. He left a $2 tip on a $38 bill. Mia cleared the table and counted the money, and the mathematics of her survival continued, adding and subtracting, always never quite enough. By 7 o'clock, her feet had stopped sending messages. They had entered a realm of pain so profound it had transcended into numbness, which was probably better, though she could not be sure because she had never lived in a body that did not hurt. She was wiping down the last table when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. The message came from an unknown number: "I know you are working late. I know where Ava goes to school. We need to talk." Her hand stopped moving. The cloth froze against the table surface. She stared at the message for 15 seconds, 30 seconds, her mind refusing to process the words even though her body already understood them. Douglas Hale. She had filed a restraining order 6 months ago. She had gone to the courthouse in her work uniform because she did not have time to change, and she had sat across from a judge and explained in a voice that tried very hard to be steady that Douglas had been violent, had threatened her children, had shown up at her workplace demanding money. The order had been issued. She had carried it with her for 3 months, and then Officer Brennan, who had gone to high school with Douglas, who still had his football jersey hanging in his office, had informed her that the restraining order had been lost in the system, that these things happened, that maybe she should just try to work things out with Douglas instead of causing trouble for one of Boston's finest young men. Now, 3 weeks after the fire had taken everything, Douglas was texting her. She deleted the message. Her heart was beating in a way that did not feel safe. She clocked out and took the bus home, and Mrs. Chen was waiting by the door with Ava and the twins, all of them in pajamas already, ready for bed. Mia paid her the $2 and tucked the children under their blankets, and she lay down beside Ava and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. 1 day passed, then 2, then 3. On the morning of the 3rd day, Mia was walking to the bus stop when she saw the police car. It was parked 3 blocks away from the diner, and Officer Brennan was leaning against it, smoking a cigarette, looking directly at her. She kept walking. "Mia," he called out. "Can we talk?" She did not stop. Her pace quickened, and she heard his footsteps behind her, and she kept her eyes straight ahead and did not turn around, and the bus arrived and she boarded it and she did not look back. That evening, 3 nights after she had held a bleeding child on the sidewalk, Mia was walking home from the bus stop when a black sedan pulled into the parking lot of the Sunrise, and a man emerged from the back seat, blood soaking through his white shirt, his body barely able to stay upright. His name was Luca Castellano, and he had no idea that the woman who had saved his son's life was about to become the most important person in his world. 3 nights after she had held a bleeding child on the sidewalk, Mia was walking home from the bus stop when a black sedan pulled into the parking lot of the Sunrise Diner. The rain fell in sheets, cold and relentless, drumming against the car's hood like a countdown. A man emerged from the back seat, blood soaking through his white shirt, his body barely able to stay upright. His name was Luca Castellano, and he had no idea that the woman who had saved his son's life was about to become the most important person in his world. The ambulance sirens cut through the November darkness before Mia even knew what was happening. She was clocking out when she heard the crash in the parking lot, metal screaming against metal, the sound of something precious being broken. She ran outside without thinking, and there he was, a tall man in an expensive suit, blood trailing down his neck, his breathing shallow. She knelt in the rainwater without hesitation. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Just stay with me." Her hands, stained with coffee grounds from the dinner shift, pressed against his shoulder. She did not know his name. She did not know that this man commanded an empire that stretched across 3 states. She only knew that he was hurt and alone, and the paramedics were still 5 minutes away. 2 men in dark suits emerged from a second vehicle that materialized from the shadows. Sergio, tall with silver threading through his dark hair, moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to power. Franco, younger with a scar mapping across his jaw, spoke rapid Italian into a phone. Their eyes locked on Mia, kneeling in blood and rain, still whispering encouragement to a stranger. "You called this in?" Sergio asked. She nodded, not looking up. "I heard the crash from inside. I work here." Franco's hand went to his ear. Sergio watched her with sharp, analytical eyes, the kind of gaze that catalogued everything. He helped her stand as the ambulance pulled into the lot, paramedics rushing past with controlled urgency. "What is your name?" Sergio asked while the medics loaded Luca onto the stretcher. "Mia Winters." Something shifted in Sergio's expression. He and Franco exchanged a look that carried weight between them. "You helped a boy 3 nights ago. Outside this diner. Hit by a car." Her eyes widened. "Matteo? Is he okay?" "He is fine," Franco said quietly. "Because of you." The ambulance pulled away, sirens fading into the rain-soaked darkness. Sergio reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, plain white, no name, only a number printed in black. He placed it in her trembling hand. "Someone will contact you," he said. Mia stared at the card, confused, exhausted. "I do not want anything. I just helped." Franco actually smiled, a razor-thin thing that appeared and disappeared like a blade. "We know. That is why it matters." They left in the second vehicle, disappearing into the night as silently as they had come, leaving Mia alone in the rain with blood on her apron and questions in her chest that had no answers. 36 hours later, at 9 o'clock on a Friday evening, someone knocked on the door of her apartment. Mia opened it to find Sergio and Franco standing in her narrow hallway, completely out of place in their tailored suits among the peeling paint and water-stained walls. Ava hid behind her mother's legs, sensing that these men carried something dangerous in their stillness. "May we come in?" Sergio asked gently. "We need to talk about Luca Castellano." Inside her cramped living room, surrounded by children's toys and the smell of boiled rice and beans, Sergio explained carefully while Franco stood by the door with his hands folded. "The man you saved is someone important. Matteo, that is his son. Mr. Castellano does not forget debts." Mia shook her head. "I do not want money. I just did what anyone would do." "Most people would not," Franco said. His voice carried something almost like respect. "Most people would walk away and pretend they saw nothing." Sergio leaned forward. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, call that number. Day or night. It does not matter." He stood to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Your ex-boyfriend? Douglas Hale. Stay away from him." Her blood went cold. "How do you know about Douglas?" "We know everything about you now, Mrs. Winters. And we know what he is." Sergio's eyes were steady, certain. "That is all you need to understand." They left. Mia stood holding the business card, her mind spinning through possibilities and fears she could not name. She tucked the children into bed, then sat alone in the dark and allowed herself one small moment of hope before crushing it down as recklessly as she had crushed so many other fragile things. 2 weeks passed. Mia returned to her double shifts, counting tips that amounted to pocket change, saving every dollar that might keep them housed for 1 more month. The business card sat in her apron pocket like a secret she could not tell. Then came the Wednesday when a customer she had never seen before ordered coffee and slid an envelope across the counter. Inside was a check for $25,000 and a note in clean, careful handwriting for the children. No debt attached. Elsie? Her hand shook so violently the check nearly fell to the floor. She ran outside, but the man was already gone, dissolving into the afternoon crowd like smoke. That night, she called the number on the business card. Sergio answered on the second ring, his voice unsurprised. Mrs. Winters. I cannot accept this, she said, her voice cracking. It is too much. It is too much. Mr. Castellano insists, Sergio replied, and there was something almost gentle in his tone. You gave him his life. He gives you a chance. She cashed the check 3 days later with her hand shaking so badly the bank teller asked if she was all right. She bought Ava a winter coat that actually fit, new sneakers for the twins, paid 2 months of rent. She kept $60 for herself and felt guilty even for that. Then Douglas found her at the diner on a Tuesday night at 10 o'clock. He slid into a booth and smiled at her, that smile she remembered from before everything fell apart. Thin-featured, sharp-eyed, wearing an expensive watch she knew he did not earn. Heard you came into some money, Mia. Big checks at the bank. My friends at the bank saw you. Her stomach twisted. I do not want to talk to you. You never do, he said, and his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. But we have unfinished business. Those kids, the apartment, everything you have, you belong to me until I say different. The courts will not help you. I have friends there now. Judges who owe me favors. Cops who know better than to ask questions. He left before she could respond, leaving her with trembling hands and a dropped coffee pot that shattered across the tile floor like breaking glass. The next morning, at the office building where she cleaned on weekends, Margaret Harrington was waiting in the lobby. 53 years old, blonde hair in a severe bun, a designer suit that probably cost more than Mia earned in 2 months. Her cold eyes assess Mia the way a predator assesses prey. You must be Mia, Margaret said. Her voice was ice poured into velvet. We need to discuss your employment here. I have worked here 8 months, Mia said carefully. Is something wrong? I am on the building management board. I have been reviewing concerns. Complaints about your work quality. Theft allegations. Margaret examined her manicured nails as though the conversation bored her. Your contract is terminated. Effective immediately. I have never stolen anything, Mia protested, but Margaret was already turning away. Nevertheless, dear, Douglas sends his regards. The words landed like a fist. Margaret walked away, leaving Mia standing in the lobby with her cleaning supplies and the realization that everything was falling apart again. That night, sitting alone at her kitchen table with bills and a calculator, Mia stared at the foreclosure notice that had arrived that morning. A property she had never owned, listed with Douglas's name as primary mortgagor. $65,000 due in 5 days or the seizure proceedings would begin. And if the court system was corrupted the way Douglas claimed, if he truly had judges and officers in his pocket, then the children would be taken. Everything would be gone. She picked up the business card with Sergio's number and dialed before she could talk herself into silence. He answered on the first ring, as though he had been waiting for her call. I need help, she whispered. I am sorry. I know I already took so much, but... Tell me, he said. She explained about Douglas, about Margaret, about the foreclosure notice and the 5 days counting down like a timer on a bomb. She explained about being nobody and having nothing and running out of time. Mr. Castellano will want to speak with you directly, Sergio said quietly. Tomorrow. I will send a car. The next day, a black car picked her up after her diner shift. Franco drove in silence while Mia sat in the back, her heart hammering against her ribs. They arrived at a building she had passed 1,000 times but never entered, upscale, secure, guarded by men in dark suits who nodded as the car passed through the underground garage. Sergio met her in the lobby and led her to an elevator that required a key. When the doors opened on the top floor, she stepped into a different world. Luca Castellano's office overlooked Boston Harbor through massive windows that made the rain seem like it was falling inside the room itself. The office smelled of expensive coffee and leather and old wood. Dark furniture, precise arrangements, the controlled aesthetic of someone who demanded order in all things. And there was Luca himself, standing when she entered, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar that traced from his eyebrow to his cheekbone like a map of violence survived. He was perhaps 40, perhaps older. His eyes were dark and did not look away. "Mrs. Winters. Thank you for coming." His voice was deep, surprisingly gentle. It did not match the scar or the power radiating from him like heat from a furnace. She sat on the edge of a chair, her spine rigid despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. "I am sorry to bother you. I did not know where else to turn." He sat across from her, not behind the desk. "Tell me everything." And so she did. The fire that took her apartment, her belongings, the photograph she could not replace. Douglas's escalating threats, the restraining order that had vanished like it was never filed. Margaret's sudden appearance, the job she had held for 8 months erased in minutes. The exact numbers that were destroying her, $65,000 in 5 days, 3 children depending on her, $78 remaining in her bank account. As she spoke, she watched his expression. It did not change, but Franco and Sergio exchanged a look that carried weight between them. Franco leaned close to Sergio and whispered something in rapid Italian, and she heard him say, "In 15 years, I have never seen him like this." When she finished, Luca was quiet for a long moment. "You did not involve me," he said finally. "You saved my son without knowing who he was. You saved me without asking for anything in return. That is rare." He leaned forward slightly. "Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington are making a mistake. They do not understand who they are threatening." Mia shook her head. "I am nobody. A waitress. A single mother." "You have mine now," Luca said, and something in his voice made it sound like a vow. "My father was murdered when I was 16. I watched from a closet, too afraid to move, too small to fight. I have spent every year since building power so I would never be helpless again. So my son would never be helpless." His hands tightened on the chair arms. "You protected Matteo. You protected me. That creates a debt that does not expire." The rain drummed against the windows like insistent knocking, and in that moment, Mia understood that her life had shifted on an axis she did not yet comprehend. Luca Castelliano was offering her his protection, and in his world, such an offer came with consequences neither of them could predict. The rain fell in sheets against the windows of Mia's apartment, each drop hitting the glass like a tiny accusation. It was 2:27 in the morning when she made the call, her voice barely holding together as she whispered the nightmare into Sergio's waiting ear. The foreclosure notice was still crumpled in her pocket, the paper damp from sweat and November cold. $65,000. 5 days. She had $78 to her name. Sergio listened without interrupting. She could hear him breathing on the other end, steady and calm while her own breath came in short, fractured pieces. "Mrs. Winters," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "Stay where you are. Do not go to work tomorrow. Do not leave the apartment. We are handling this." She whispered, "How? How is this even possible?" "Trust Mr. Castelliano," Sergio said, and the line went dead. Across the city, in a downtown office on the 42nd floor where the lights never fully dimmed, Luca Castelliano stood motionless as Sergio delivered the report. The shipping manifests in front of him suddenly seemed insignificant. Forged documents. A child services threat. $65,000 in 5 days. The numbers landed like blows. Luca buttoned his suit jacket with deliberate precision. Each movement controlled, calculated, the way he had learned to move when he was 16 years old and had watched his father die from a closet he was too small and too afraid to leave. "Call Romano at the FBI field office," Luca said, his voice level as still water. "Tell him we are delivering Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington. Full package, tied with a bow." Sergio straightened. "And the local police?" Every single one who ignored her restraining order requests. Luca moved to the window, looking out at Boston sprawled beneath him in amber and shadow. They knew who Douglas Hale was. They chose not to see. That choice ends tonight. What Sergio did not know was that Luca had been building files for years. Years. Insurance policies written in names and dates and documented crimes. People like Douglas Hale who operated in the spaces between law and mercy. Corrupt officers who took money to look away. Margaret Harrington, whose cruelty wore a designer suit and a practiced smile. All of it was about to be converted into justice. 48 hours passed like a held breath. At an upscale restaurant in downtown Boston, Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington sat across from each other at a corner table, wine glasses catching the light. Margaret was speaking, her voice pitched low and satisfied. "She has nothing," Margaret said, her smile thin as a blade. "By Saturday, those children will be in the system and she will be buried under legal fees she cannot afford. $65,000 is a death sentence for someone like her." Douglas raised his glass. "To destroying people who deserve it." They clinked. Neither noticed the FBI surveillance team parked 3 blocks away. Neither noticed that Margaret's designer handbag, collected from dry cleaning that morning, now contained a listening device the size of a grain of rice. Neither understood that every word was being recorded. Friday morning arrived at 5:41 a.m. with a battering ram and 12 federal agents in raid jackets converging on Douglas Hale's luxury apartment in the Seaport District. The door came down in splinters. Douglas was yanked from his bed, his body hitting the floor before his mind caught up with what was happening. Hands wrenched his arms behind his back. He screamed, thrashing, cursing, demanding to know what was happening, what right they had, what he had done. The lead agent's voice cut through his panic like scissors through silk. "Douglas Hale, you are under arrest for federal fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to commit extortion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to corrupt public officials. You have the right to remain silent." The cuffs clicked around his wrists. Douglas's face went from rage to the particular white terror of a man watching his life collapse in real time. "This is a mistake. I can explain. I have friends. I know people. This will not." "Your friends are being arrested right now," the agent said, reading from a list with mechanical precision. "Officer Brennan. Officer Torres. Lieutenant Vick. Every single one. It is over." At that same moment, Margaret Harrington was sitting in her penthouse with her morning coffee, scrolling through her phone in silk pajamas the color of champagne, when FBI agents arrived at her door. She tried to keep her composure as they read her rights. Tried to imagine her lawyer would fix this. Tried to believe her social standing would protect her. Then she saw the news vans gathering outside on the street below, and she understood that Luca Castellano had made certain the media knew the exact time and place of her arrest. Public humiliation was part of the sentence. The handcuffs went on while the cameras flashed, and her mask shattered like dropped glass. On the steps of his building, Douglas Hale collapsed onto his knees, his entire body trembling. "Please," he begged, his voice broken into pieces. "Please, I will give you everything. I will testify against anyone. I will cooperate. Just do not do this. Please do not do this." He looked like a cornered animal, all his cruelty stripped away, leaving nothing but the raw animal terror of a man who finally understood what consequences meant. At 7 a.m., Sergio arrived at Mia's apartment with coffee in his hands and news that changed everything. She had not slept. Her eyes were red, her hand shaking as she let him in. The cramped kitchen table suddenly seemed smaller with him sitting across from her, this man who worked for Luca Castellano, this man who moved through the world with the easy certainty of someone backed by power. "Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington were arrested 2 hours ago," Sergio said, and he watched as her face went through 5 different expressions in quick succession. Disbelief. Hope. Fear that it was not real. Federal charges. The forged documents have been exposed and dismissed. Every police officer who ignored your restraining order requests has been suspended pending investigation. He slid a newspaper across the table. The front page showed both of them in handcuffs, their faces twisted with shock and shame. 40 years in federal prison for Douglas Hale, Sergio continued. 35 for Margaret Harrington. No bail. No mercy. There will be trials, of course, but the outcome is not in question. Mia's hands covered her mouth. Her entire body shook. The $65,000 they demanded, Sergio said, his voice dropping lower, we have ensured that every cent they extorted from others over the years is being returned. Your name is cleared. Your apartment is safe. Your children are safe. She began to cry, and Sergio understood it was not sadness falling from her eyes but the release of months of terror finally permitted to leave her body. Why, she whispered. Why did he do this? Sergio stood to leave. The morning light was changing in the windows, turning everything gold and soft. Because you showed his son kindness when the world showed him nothing but danger, Sergio said. Because you saved Luca's life without knowing who he was and without asking for anything in return. Because Mr. Castellano believes that people like you should not be crushed by people like them. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He would like to see you. Today. Same place where you first spoke. Will you come? Mia nodded, still unable to speak, her eyes fixed on the newspaper front page showing Douglas's collapsed face, Margaret's shattered composure. But what Sergio did not tell her was that Luca's feelings had shifted somewhere between gratitude and something far more dangerous. Something that burned in his chest like a coal that would not cool. When a man like Luca Castellano looked at a woman like Mia Winters and saw not gratitude but a future, that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment his empire bent toward love. That was the moment neither of them could predict what would come next. 1 year later, the November rain returned to Boston, soft and patient against the floor-to-ceiling windows of a penthouse that touched the sky. Mia Winters stood in the reflection of glass 30 stories above the streets where she had once counted coins like prayers, and she barely recognized herself. Her hair fell in waves past her shoulders, professionally cut, the exhaustion erased from beneath her eyes. The simple cream-colored dress she wore fit her body like she had reclaimed ownership of it. No coffee stains. No apron. No trembling in her hands. Behind her, the corporate reception hummed with the controlled chaos of business people circling each other like careful predators. Her company had rented this building for the evening, some client event that felt impossibly distant from the world she inhabited a year ago. She had slipped away to the balcony 20 minutes ago, needing air, needing space to remember how far she had traveled. The year had unfolded like a hand slowly opening. When the federal agents led Douglas and Margaret away in handcuffs, when the newspapers screamed about corruption and extortion, when Mia's name appeared in articles no longer as victim but as survivor, something inside her had shifted. Luca arranged work for her at a legitimate accounting firm downtown, framing it as investment, never as charity. She completed the certification she had started before her husband died, each course paid in installments she submitted faithfully to Sergio, not knowing he never cashed a single check. Ava's school uniform fit her properly now. The twins slept in beds that did not sag. Heat rose from the radiators through the winter. But Luca had stayed away. Only twice in 12 months had their paths crossed, once at a charity gala where he nodded from across the room like a stranger, once at Matteo's birthday party when Sergio casually invited her and the children. He thanked her again that night, formal and distant, his voice polished like a stone worn smooth by careful handling. She had convinced herself the debt was settled. That gratitude had simply transformed into distance. That this was how it should end, with her safe, her children thriving, the Mafia boss returning to his empire while she built a normal life in the spaces he had protected. The November wind carried the scent of rain and exhaust from the city below, and for a moment she was back in the diner parking lot, blood on her hands, a stranger bleeding into the wet asphalt. Then a voice behind her, deep and solid like an oath spoken in absolute darkness. "You look like you belong here now." She turned. Luca stood in the balcony doorway in a black suit with no tie, his white shirt open at the collar, and he looked exactly as she remembered and somehow entirely different. The guardedness had softened. His dark eyes held something exposed, something unguarded. The scar running from his eye to his cheekbone caught the light of the city below. Luca. Her breath caught. I did not know you would be here. He stepped onto the balcony, and the rain misted both of them like a blessing neither of them deserved. His hands went into his pockets, then came out again, then went back, a gesture so human it made her chest ache with recognition. He was struggling. This man who commanded empires was struggling. I own the building, he said quietly. Sergio mentioned your company was hosting an event. I wanted to see how you were doing. The lie was obvious and somehow beautiful. He had not wanted to see. He had needed to see. The distance stretched between them, close enough to touch but vast as oceans. I stayed away on purpose, Luca continued, his voice dropping lower. For a year. Deliberately, carefully, staying away. Why? She stepped closer, rain soaking into her dress. Because a year ago you needed protection. Safety. Stability. He met her eyes. Not complications. Not a man like me bringing his world into yours when you were just beginning to rebuild. She took another step. And now? His voice broke slightly. Now I cannot stay away anymore. I have tried. For 12 months I have tried to convince myself that what I feel is gratitude, just responsibility. But it is not. He ran a hand through his dark hair. When Sergio called that night and told me you were standing in the rain at 2 in the morning, barely holding on, I realized something. I was not just protecting you because you saved Matteo. I was protecting you because the thought of you hurting made me hurt. The thought of you afraid made me want to burn down the world. Mia's eyes shone. Luca. You walked into my life covered in my blood, he continued, each word deliberate, asking for nothing, just trying to help a stranger. You showed me something I forgot existed, goodness without calculation. Courage without armor. Every other woman I have known wanted what I could provide. You just wanted to save a man bleeding in the rain. He paused. I am not a good man, Mia. I have done things that would make you run. I have blood on my hands that will never wash clean. But around you, around your children, I want to be better. You make me want to be better. She closed the distance between them. You saved me. You saved my children. You destroyed the people who wanted to destroy us. You gave me a chance to build a real life. How can you say you are not good? He touched her face gently, his scarred knuckles trembling. Because protection and vengeance come easy to me. Letting someone in, that terrifies me. She smiled through tears. I have been terrified for years. Maybe we can be terrified together. Luca kissed her then, soft and careful, rain falling around them like a benediction. When they broke apart, he whispered against her hair, I cannot promise you normal. My life will always be dangerous. Always complicated. She touched his scarred knuckles. I do not need normal. I just need honest. I need someone who stays. His voice was rough with emotion. I will stay. For as long as you let me, I will stay. They stood together on the balcony, the city spread below them like a kingdom of lights, the rain washing away the past with patient hands. Inside the reception, people noticed them through the glass. Sergio and Franco exchanged looks they had waited 12 months to exchange, knowing something had shifted, something had finally broken open. 6 months later, on a Sunday afternoon, Luca's home held the sound of children's laughter echoing through rooms built for silence. Matteo taught Ava chess at a wooden table while the twins chased a golden retriever puppy across the yard, a dog Luca pretended he had not specifically purchased, though his men had watched him spend hours selecting it. In the kitchen, Mia stood beside him, chopping vegetables with surprising competence for a man who had never touched a knife for cooking. The fearsome Luca Castelliano, she teased, domestic in my presence. He smiled, rare and genuine. Only for you. Sergio arrived with Franco, bringing wine and the ease of men who had become family. Franco taught Matteo card tricks while Sergio discussed college funds with Mia over coffee, casually mentioning that accounts had been established, not charity, he assured her. Investments in good people. The kind of investment that pays forever. The fire that took everything from Mia had been the beginning, not the end. What she lost in those flames, security, possessions, proof of her past, had made space for something she never imagined. She learned that being saved does not make you weak. That accepting help is its own kind of courage. That the best things sometimes grow from the darkest soil. And Luca learned that the empire he built from rage could also shelter gentleness. That strength means knowing when to strike and when to hold. That the best revenge against a world that took his father was building something worth protecting, something worth staying for. 1 year after the confession, they stood on that same penthouse balcony where he had broken open. Clear November night, stars visible above the city lights. No rain this time. He held her close. Do you ever regret it? His voice was rough. That night in the parking lot? If you had walked away, your life would have stayed simple. She turned in his arms. Simple is not the same as good. I would choose this, choose us, 1,000 times. Even knowing what my world costs. She smiled. Especially knowing. Because I have seen what your world can do. It can destroy. But it can also protect. It can also save. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. If this story moved you, drop a like right now and share it with someone who needs to believe that good things can come from the hardest nights. Subscribe because tomorrow we are bringing you another story of survival, power, and unexpected love. What did you think of Mia and Luca's journey? Did she make the right choice? Comment below. We are reading every comment. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. See you tomorrow with a brand new story.